Hey everyone, it's time for another sermon. If you would go ahead and turn to your Bibles to Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31. We're going to really start off with reading some text, and I always do this lesson around this time of year because, I think about what this time of year means and a special holiday. I don't think it's right that it's all marked down to one holiday, but it's definitely something to be mindful of and to think about all the work and hard work that goes into it. But Proverbs 31, let's look at verse 10 real quick. And not real quick, but we're going to look at it for a little bit. But go with me. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he'll have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool, flax, willing to work with her hands. She is like a merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night, also provides food for her household, and a portion for her maidservant. She considers a field and buys it. From her profit she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength, and with strength her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamps does not go out by night. She stretches out her hand to the distaff, and her hands holds the spindle. She extends her hands to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid for snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen of purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he is sitting among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is a law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. When you read things like this, you see a godly woman, the outline of the perfect godly woman. And when you think about motherhood, you think about this role that God's given her and how blessed it really is, how amazing that role is. If you hear a bang, I'm sorry, that's my hamsters rolling around in their balls. But no one rises to that higher plane of moral accomplishments than the godly mother. When you think about all that she does, all that she sacrifices, all that she deals with. When you think about the sacrifice of a mother, you think about, the children that she bears, the unborn. She gives them nourishment, protection. She shares her time, her talents, her energy, her heart as she weeps, and her laughs throughout the changes of life. And I'm not saying a husband's not as important either, but when you look at all the things that a mother does, the role is quite extraordinary. No task on earth requires more, outside of being a Christian, more dedication, commitment, highly refined skills, tempered by compassion and her patience, as the mother. When you think about human obligations, there's not one that's more adaptable or has more substitution than really a mother, because you never know what's going to happen from day to day. I see mothers post, new mothers post on Facebook all the time that their son or daughter has done this or that, or gotten into this adventure, and that she had to change her plans or change the way things are. And you have to admire that role. And again, I'm not saying husbands don't matter. It's an equal thing. But when you think about what a mother does, I think about how the world looks at mothers and how God looks at mothers and wives, for that matter. And it's something that we do need to cherish and think about. So we're going to look at the functions of motherhood. And have gratitude for our mothers. Because, again, I know the holiday can be hard for some people. Some people may not be able to have children. Some people may have lost their mothers, all these things. But it's always good to look back at them and remember them for what they've done. Because one thing that's the problem with our just humans in general, as children, we don't appreciate what our mothers do. But by the time we're out of college, we realize how much of a friend we truly have. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on as we look at this. But the first thing I want to talk about is godly mothers are managers of the home. In Proverbs 31 and verse 27 says, "She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her." Again, husbands, when we talk about this role, you praise your wives, you praise the mothers for what they do. What they're doing is great. It's amazing. But I want you to look at another thing at 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14. It says, "Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully." So they're to marry, bear children, and guide the home. Again, that's mother's duty, but also says wives. So again, wives who don't have children, there's still things to be doing to guide the home, because keeping the home, and that's your primary responsibility. And when you look at the world and how they've really changed so much of what we looked at, so much of what God wanted, you find the satisfaction, you fulfill yourself, you feel that yearning. After years of experimentation or self-ambitions, career-first attitudes, society is slowly seeing that backlash, because we need mothers, we need people raising up the next generation and so forth, and doing what's right. So many people look down on this role and say, "Oh, well, they're lazy. Oh, they're no good." Usually people who have that mentality don't really know what a mother goes through. I think about, I was raised by my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and I think about all the hard work they had to put in, because, again, they were up there in age. They didn't have, they weren't prepared for this and what was going on with me. But that's another story for another time. And I look back now, being a preacher and working and all that, and I appreciate all of the hard work they had to put in to make sure the family kind of stayed together and functioned together. But when you look at this worthy woman, she is an example of a domestic manager. She's managing the home. She's making sure everything is as it should be. And that's something that's hard, because, being a preacher, it's hard to kind of, make sure you manage what does this people need, what kind of needs need to be fulfilled. Or when you look at me as a security guard, my job is to be the site supervisor, so I'm managing, make sure all the guards have what they need, to make sure the things are being done, the client's happy. It's stressful. But think about it here in the home, making sure things are clean, making sure the kids are taken care of, make sure the husband's taken care of, make sure yourself is taken care of, make sure the house is in proper order. All these crazy things happen, and she is keeping all this. So anyone who says, "Oh, you're just a housewife," I laugh at you. Because, again, this is something that's important. And we're seeing the effects of society. Because, again, I've seen a lot of young couples who push their kids off on their grandparents or their parents. And they don't raise their children. And then they wonder why their children are indifferent to them, or why certain doctrines get into them. We allow the television to raise up our children. We allow YouTube to raise up our children. And that's not a good thing. It's really not a good thing. So we do give them the appreciation that they deserve. An effective manager of the home, we see in verses 21 and 22. And I'm not going to read those again. But if you want to, you can pause and look at them, or have it open, because we're going to look at other verses too. And it says she has her priorities in order, even though she has pursuits outside the home, verses 16 and 24. But her family comes first, verse 15 and 18, before other interests. And I think that is the problem with society today, is that the work comes first and not the home. And that's why we're seeing a lot of broken homes, a lot of things that need to be changed. So we see that such a woman compliments her husband, verse 23. We talked about during the eldership video that a wife or a mother can hurt someone from being an elder. The both roles complement each other. They help each other. They are helping. They are guiding. And we see that she contributes to the bright future of her family in verse 25. So that gives us an idea that a symbolic relationship, this husband and wife and children, there is a duty that needs to be made, or it needs to be done. And we need to be sure that we're fulfilling those roles. Because again, what does television teach us? We see violence, we see sexuality, we see things that kids should not be learning and knowing. I think we're seeing a rise right now of that need, especially during the COVID-19 outbreak, that parents are now at home and teaching their kids, and they see the importance, or at least I hope they're seeing the importance of teaching their children. Because again, like I said, if you don't teach them, someone's going to sneak in and teach them. Do you want to be a godly wisdom, or do you want to be a worldly wisdom that's really making our nation and country and the world falling apart? The second thing we see is mothers are models of obedience. And I know that's such an ugly word that people don't like to hear. Obedience and submission. Well, when you think about who Christians are obedient and submissive to the Lord. There's no other way to word it or to look at it. We serve God. We are servants. But we know that that's her first and foremost, is that she's obedient to God. And that's where it all starts. When I got off my last engagement, I told myself I'm not going to settle for anything less than a godly woman. And sure enough, I found Laura, which is amazing. Don't settle for anything less. Find that godly woman. If she serves God with all of her heart, then the rest does fall into place. In James chapter 4 and verse 7, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. If you don't submit to God, if you have doubt, if you have worry, Satan's going to get his foothold in, and he's going to tear you apart. And that's why you have to be careful. That's why you always have to be looking and searching the Word of God. But the second is to her husband. And again, when you think about that, like, oh, well, the woman has to submit to her husband. Well, think about what he's doing. We forget about that part, don't we? We forget the man is sacrificing and submitting to his wife. It always bothers me when it's a one-sided relationship where one is towering over the other. This is supposed to be a symbolic relationship. This is supposed to be a relationship that helps and builds. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. Sometimes the only Bible certain people read are you and your actions and your dedication. I know people see that. I know people notice that. So be that example. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 5, for in this matter in former times the holy woman who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good, are not afraid with any terror. So she becomes that role model. She becomes the primary teacher of her children. And that's something that, you look at and you say, wow, that's amazing. Yes, that is a wonderful role. But people don't take up this role. They look down upon it. If they're not a CFO or CEO or working or whatever, well, that's boring. That's something that is desperately needed. I want to share a story with you that I found online. It says, at a banquet, the mother of George Washington was sitting beside a distinguished French officer. Turning to Washington's mother, the officer asked, "How have you managed to rear such a splendid son?" And she replied, "I taught him to obey." Obedience, respect, love begins in the home. It does. It starts with the home. And a model of obedience can be seen in Mary. In Luke chapter 1 and verse 38, it says, "Then Mary said, Behold the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her." So, what greater attitude? When I looked at this verse and I put in this lesson, I was thinking to myself, what greater attitude than someone saying, "Let it be according to your word. Let it be done, Lord. Let me look to you." Because when you think about what were her options during that, what were Mary's options? She could run away, because that worked so well for Jonah. And she could have offered excuses. That worked so well for Moses. She could have argued with the angel. Of course, that never works. She could have demanded answers. She could have refused, or she could have surrendered to it. So she chose to do as the Lord asked. The third thing we want to talk about is godly mothers are teachers of good things. Again, we have to teach the next generation, or the next generation is going to grow up to be awful. And this really reflects God's original plan for the operation of the human family. When you look at the book of Proverbs, there are a lot of motherly wisdom in this, and it's full of admonitions, and it shows how mothers are to be teachers. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, it says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." So as we see, there is the instructions of your father. Obviously, listen to your father. But the law of your mother, who teaches you? Well, mom does, right? And yes, we see this as a common expression in Proverbs. In Proverbs 31 and verse 1, the words of King Lemuel, the utterance of his mother taught him. So we see that his mom did teach him. And take note of what she teaches her son. If you're in Proverbs 31, let's look at verse 3. It says, "Do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. If it's not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the justice of all the afflicted." Drop down to verse 8 and 9. "Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth and judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy." So we also see that teaching is done by example. And that's one thing children do pick up on. I always tell this story because I find it funny and interesting. There is a couple, a family, who are like brothers and sisters to me and Laura. And their daughter, for some reason, is infatuated with me. And she's got me wrapped around her finger sometimes. But anyways, so we were at their house one day, and she handed me a teacup. And one of the things I did is I did my pinky out as I picked up the cup. Well, then she started doing it. She noticed me doing it, so she started doing it. And her mom was like, "Well, where did you pick that up?" Matt told me that. Sean showed me that, and I was like, "Oh no, I've got to be careful with what I do around her," because she's being impressed by the action she sees. Now, while this gesture is not a bad gesture, it's what they do to drink tea, you notice she notices it, right? And the thing is, when you fight in front of your children, when you say dirty things in front of your children, when you do dirty things in front of your children, they notice. And don't think that they won't, because they do. Even the smallest things, children pick up. And you want to be a Christian, godly example. And you got to think about it. When your actions don't harmonize with your words or with what you do, kids pick up on that. If you don't trust in God, well, why should they trust in God? They see that you don't, so why should they? If you don't go to church, why would they not go to church? So they recognize, hypocrites. And the effective teaching is lost. Because if you act like a Christian church, and then outside church act like the world, who spends more time on worldly thoughts, right? Sundays and Wednesdays versus every other day. What do they see? So we have to be careful what we teach our children. And we should never demand more of our children than we do ourselves. And that's something that, some people do need to realize. Because, if you don't want it for yourself, you're not going to get it out of your children. And that was something very hard that I had to deal with as I was growing up. My grandmother wasn't really, really active in the church, and it wasn't until after I started becoming more active that she became more active. So, she saw that in me, and, again, it worked out for the better if you know how I got back into the church. And you have to be careful about these examples that we're leaving, because if we don't leave the right examples, wrong ones are going to be implemented. But let's talk about some good mothers in the Bible, examples of good mothers. Now, we're going to have some lengthy reading, so just kind of bear with me a little bit. I may butcher some of the names. You can always show me down below in the comments, oh, this is how you pronounce it, and you'll help me out a lot, I promise. But let's go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 2. Let's look at verses 1 through 10. Exodus 2, 1 through 10. And we see that Jochebed is an example of a worthy mother. Her son was born in the midst of difficult and perilous times. Look at chapter 2. Let's look at verse 1. It says, And the man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrush for him, dabbed him on the asphalt and pinch, and put the child in it, and laid in it in the reeds of the riverbank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done of him. Then the daughter of the Pharaoh, came down to bathe in the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, This is one of the Hebrew children. Then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew woman, and she may nurse the child for you? And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. She said, So the maiden went and called the child's mother, the Pharaoh's daughter, and said to her, Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to the Pharaoh's daughter. She became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, Because I drew him out of the water. So it's a very interesting story about how, this turned about. Moses' mother instilled faith in her child because she wanted to make wise choices. She protected him, came full circle, and now she's taking care of them. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, has hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer afflictions with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he looked to the reward. Excuse me, I got a little choked with spittle. We also see Hannah was an example of a mother who was encouraging her son to excel in great things. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Let's look at verses 11 through 18. Because she prayed earnestly for her child. 1 Samuel 1:11. It says, Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but you give your maidservant a male child, then I'll give him to the Lord all the days of his life. No razor shall come upon his head. All it happened as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart. Only her lips moved, but the voice was not heard. And therefore Eli thoroughly thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you." But Hannah answered and said, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of the complaint and grief I have spoken until now." Then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant you your petition, which you have so asked of him." And she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So she gave her child to the Lord as she had promised. Drop down to verse 24. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, and 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and the skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young, and they slaughtered a bull, and brought the child to Eli, and said to him, "O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, as I am a woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I pray, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord." So they worshiped the Lord there. And we see that she continued to provide for her child in verses 18 and 19. But Samuel ministered, or 1 Samuel chapter 2, let's look at verse 18 and 19, But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. So we see, again, mothers play a pivotal role in the growing up in the church. Does it always have to be? Unfortunately, we know stories where it isn't the case. But it does help a lot, when you think about that. Eunice and Lois were a good mother and grandmother of Timothy. We're talking about Timothy in our classes. And in Acts chapter 16 and verse 1, it says, "Then he came to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a certain Jewish woman who believed, but his father was Greek." In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 3, it says, "I thank God when I serve with a pure conscience, as my forefathers did. Without ceasing, I remember you in my prayers night and day, greatly stirring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may fulfill with joy when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois, and then your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also." So we see, they rose Timothy up and helped him in his faith. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. 2 Timothy 3:15. "And from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, and were able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus." Philippians chapter 2 and verse 19. "And from that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus." So again, learning them young, learning them from a young age, it helps them to retain it, helps them to know who God is, to build upon that. Of course, when you hear about my story, I had to quickly do a crash course because, I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't grow up learning these stories. So I had to, struggle a little bit during classes and stuff like that. And I made myself learn. And with the help of Lonnie and a few other preachers, I am where I am today. I'm very thankful for that. The fourth thing is, mothers are helpers of the helpless. And we talk about that in the sense of what is more helpless than an infant child. When you talk about the Bible, it talks about, drinking the milk of the Word, being babes in Christ. That's when they're most vulnerable because doctrine can come in and snatch them away. Well, when you see an infant, An infant's helpless, and we see mothers have this wonderful ability to love their child regardless of how ungrateful they are, regardless of how hurtful they may be at times. They still love their children and they still take care of them. Now, again, I am going to step on some toes here. I don't really care. There are people who are monsters, and I'm going to call them that. I'm sorry. I'm going to call them monsters. We hear stories who leave their children out in gutters or kill them with hooks and other things because they want an abortion. And to me, if you can do that to another life, you are a monster. There's no way about it. If you're mad at me, I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. But in Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 1 says the proverb of Solomon, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. And we've seen that before. I have seen. I want to tell of two stories, really. I've watched a mother cry because of the shame her son has brought upon the family, and this isn't me. This is just someone else. I want to share the story without using names. They're a poor family, and the son is a horrible, horrible person. But I've seen the mother in tears, the father in tears because of things he's done. And I've seen a rich family whose son did the same thing. I remember as clear as day seeing the father on the phone saying, "Son, you're killing us with what you're doing." So one's a poor family and one's a rich family. Regardless of your past, regardless of who you are, if you bring shame upon your family, it's heartbreaking. It's destruction. But I want you to think about the mother in a positive light. This is what this story, this sermon's about. Is think of how often mothers have to be nurses, have to be teachers, have to be housekeepers, have to be cooks, have to be chauffeurs, have to be counselors and friends. I'll never forget in fourth grade, and this just shows you how dumb I was in fourth grade. There's this girl, and she tormented me because she didn't like me for whatever reason, which is fine. And I remember coming home from school, locking myself in the bathroom. I was like, "Oh, I hate all girls. Girls are terrible. Girls are just the most awfulest things ever." And Nanny, stood at the door, and she was talking to me, and she was like, "Well, what do you think I am?" I was like, "Well, you're not a girl." But I am. I'm a woman. And we had a talk. And she changed my mind. But we forget about all these things. There were times where, I think of my grandmother teaching me how to spell, and sometimes even herself trying to teach me math, not knowing the problems herself, trying to learn so she could teach me and help me with homework. You think about all these things, and you forget how much a mother does, how much a wife does, and we use one day to appreciate them, right? I mean, it blows my mind, and we should always be honoring this role. We should never look down on this role. When you think about baby birds, they're only in their nest for a season, and then they leave them to fly, right? And they never even think about them anymore. But our mothers are forever, even when they're not with us anymore. They're still there, teaching us. And the things we learn are with us, We don't forget them. And they continue to do stuff for us, even when we're older, I remember my grandmother helping me when I had my back surgery. I was like, I'm 30-something years old, and you're treating me like a baby again. And she's like, "Well, I'll do what I have to make sure you get better." And I'm like, "Well, I appreciate that." And they never stop caring for us, even when you're a disappointment to them and do bad things. Your parents still love you, no matter what. I'm not saying all parents are good, because There are terrible parents out there, I know that. But the ones who take care of you, those are the ones we remember. Those are the ones we love. And you see that godly mothers build their house on godly things. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 1, it says, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish pulls it down with her hands." And we do see people doing that from time to time. And husbands do it just as well. But if you're not going to live godly, you're going to tear your house down. If you don't have some morale about you, it's not going to help. It's going to hurt more than anything. But we need to give the wisdom of God a chance, because the wisdom of God is good. It's good for us. The wisdom of God is exhibited in motherhood. The greatest lesson we've ever learned comes from loving, comes from caring, from sacrifice. The mothers who were always available. And, it's not something to be taken lightly. It's not something that you can just, there's no book that encompasses everything. Even with the Bible, and it doesn't prepare us for every single thing that happens. It teaches us how to be godly people and raise up godly people. But sometimes your patience with your children, you kind of want to choke them. I get it, but you don't. Right? That's what the Bible does teach us. Don't do that. And you panic and you get scared. I understand. I'm not a father, obviously, but I do know what the Bible teaches. And I was a child at once. Number 5 is mothers are to be respected and honored. Don't forget that. Ever. Honor your mom. Honor your mother. Respect her. One thing I think about my grandparents is they didn't really have the money to raise me. I was kind of just dropped into their laps. But they took the responsibility to raise me. And I think about that. And I do honor, I do respect them. In Proverbs chapter 31 and verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her husbands. Don't let Sunday be the only day you ever praise her and give her honor. It's every Sunday, this holiday. Don't let Sunday be the only day. Today, when you woke up, what'd you do? Did you yell at her? Did you give her a bunch of lists of things to do? Or do you love her? Do you care about her? Children, this morning when you woke up, what'd you do? Did you give her hugs and kisses? Did you give her cards that you made? And then what happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we forget about it, right? Everything's out the window. No, today should not be the only day. Sunday should not be the only day we think about mom. It doesn't have to be a holiday to appreciate somebody. Some people only think about the Lord on Easter. If you're a true Christian worth your worth, you think about him every day, every hour. So, as you see the hard work going on, you honor your mom, you love your mom, you take care of her. Because one day, guess what? She's going to be old, she's going to be frail, it's going to be your turn to take care of her. Funny enough, that's kind of the situation I'm in with this COVID-19. Nanny is as ornery as ever. And I'm trying to take care of her. Now it's me getting onto her. Well, you shouldn't go out during all this. But respect and care. And there's sprouts of it all in the Old Testament, all in the New Testament for us to be growing, us to be more like them. In Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 3 says, every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. In Proverbs 23 and verse 25, let your mother and your father be glad. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 2, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. You ever thought about what God thinks of a disrespectful child? Ever thought about that? Have you ever given it consideration what God feels? Because in Proverbs 19 and verse 26 it says, he who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach. In Proverbs 20:20, whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in a deep darkness. In Proverbs 30 and verse 17, the eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and young eagles will eat it. As gross as that is, think about that imagery. In Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 18, if a man has a stubborn, rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed him, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of his city. Disobedience to parents is what's making our country awful. There's no respect for police. There's no respect for government. There's no respect for people. And where do you think that starts? At home. It does. Prove me wrong. So we need to be teaching. We need to be, being that example of what we need to be. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 2, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, and unholy. And these things we are seeing a lot. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 30, backbiters, haters of God, the violent, the proud, the boasters, the inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Something else that we see. But we need to use it not just today and not just tomorrow, but always respect that role. To love the woman behind this role, the person who deserves it. I want to share another story that I found. It says a man stopped at the flower shop to order some flowers to be wired to his mother who lived 200 miles away. As he got out of his car, he noticed a girl sitting at the curb sobbing. He asked her what was wrong, and she replied, I wanted to buy a rose for my mother, but I only have 75 cents, and the rose cost $2. The man smiled and says, come with me, I'll buy your rose for your mother. And he placed his FDT order of flowers to his mother and brought a single rose to the girl. As they were leaving, he offered the girl a ride, and she responded, yes, please. If you could, take me to my mom. She directed him to a cemetery where she placed a single rose in a freshly dug grave. The man returned to the flower shop, canceled the wired order, picked up the flowers, and drove 200 miles to his mother's home. We gotta think about things like that. We always get used to people always being there. And one day they're not. You won't be able to pick up the phone and call them, but you wish you could. So don't be angry with them. Don't be mad at them. Don't hold on to grudges. Don't hold on to hate. Because one day, she may not be there. In 1 John chapter 3 and verse 16 says, my little children, let us not love in word and tongue, but in deed and in truth. And I know you probably won't get to see. If you're an older person, you probably won't get to see your children today. But once COVID-19 is done with, Lord willing, be there. Be there for your mom. In conclusion, like mother, like daughter. It's a very biblical expression. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 44. Indeed, everyone who quotes this proverb will use this proverb against you, like mother, like daughter. And most of us can trace what admirable qualities we possess to our mothers. And that's true. I know I get my hot-headedness from my father. Maybe my mother, I don't know. But I ask you a question. Have you taken the time today to thank her? Have you taken the time today to tell her you love her? If you can't be there physically, you can always be there on the phone. With the advancement of technology, FaceTime, Zoom, and all those other things, the programs, you can be there for her and tell her you love her. But most importantly, let's thank God for the wisdom that He's given us through His Word. Again, this was a lesson from others, but glory does come to God. He's the one who teaches us. He's the one that gives us the knowledge that we have. He's the one that gives us all love. He is the Father, after all. Thank God for the wisdom for the plan of the human family. And let's not let the world destroy that plan, because it works. It always has and always will. And no matter how hard society tries to destroy it, it's always what's best. We always go back to God. So, I want to not only say that, but to leave us with a poem. And then the lesson will be yours. And it's called Mother's Arm. I really enjoy this. Mothers are blowers of noses and washers of ears, smoothers of bumps, spots, and wipers of tears, bathers of babies, umpires of spat, finders of boots and mittens and hats, helpers with lessons and makers of beds, shakers of dustcloths and comforters of heads, buttons to honors and winders of clocks, menders of dresses and darners of socks, tellers of stories, readers of books, judges of juries, of conduct and looks, doctors of headaches, hearers of prayers, general direction of family affairs, tenders of the home, fires, and builders of men. Oh, for the gift of this adequate pen. You think about all mothers do. And I have nothing but mad respect for you if you take upon that role. And this is why when I do this lesson every year, it's not just because I want to pat people on the back. It's not just because I want to get favor with somebody. We forget how important this role is. So if you are a mother watching this, I salute you. And I thank you for what you do. Fathers, I thank you for what you do as well. And when your time comes, Lord willing, I'll make a lesson for you. But today is your day, mothers. God bless. I love you. Thank you. If you made it this far, I do appreciate you. As always, share, like, comment, subscribe, whatever you need to do so we can get the word of God out there. Thank you for being my audience. Thank you for listening. If you have questions with anything I've said here today, you can always contact me. If you want to say something, you can always, again, message me on Facebook, give me a call or text, or leave me a comment below, and I'll get to you the best I can. I do appreciate you. Happy Mother's Day, and God bless.